Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Lauren Wilson. Lauren has a BA with honors degree in journalism and an MA in creative writing. She lives in Northeast England and with her fiance and their snuggly spaniels. The Goldens is her first book. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So fun. This, first of all, if you're not watching us, you're listening to us, go check out the cover of The Goldens because it's fabulous. And it perfectly captures, Clara's fabulous home near the school. So before we dig into all the questions and talk about these women characters who are so phenomenal, tell us a little bit about The Goldens.
Okay, so The Goldens is about an 18-year-old girl called Chloe. It's her first year at university. She's really excited, but at first it doesn't really pan out like she'd expected. She's feeling a little bit lonely, a little bit left out. And that's when she meets Clara Holland, who is a gorgeous, wealthy influencer and socialite. Their friendship, it gets a little bit intense quite quickly. Chloe even moves in with Clara, lives in her house, and she has hosts these like fantastic parties. But then slowly everything kind of becomes clear to Chloe that it's maybe not quite as lovely as it seems, and things get a little bit dark.
Just a little bit dark. There's this fabulous sort of genre of books about like young women around schools that I think there's something just so um universally sort of, um I don't even know what the word is. Sorry, I'm babbling, but it's like
No.
it's so accessible to us, and it is so pleasing to read these kinds of books. So I really enjoyed The Goldens. I want to talk about, since this is your
You.
debut novel, I have a lot of questions about the process because I think we have a lot of debut authors listening to us. But before we talk about sort of the publication process, let's talk a little bit about how this came to you. So, you know, can you talk a little bit about sort of the inspiration for the book? Um, if, I'm assuming maybe Clara came first and then Chloe next, or was it the dynamic between them? So tell us about that because it's so interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Clara did come first. So I am 28. Just for just for clarification. So when I first got Instagram, I was 18 and it was still kind of quite in the early days. It was kind of before influencers had to disclose ads and before kind of we knew all of the goings on behind the scenes. So when you went on your Instagram feed, you just saw like all these like incredible, gorgeous people with like millions of followers. And it's like, I don't know who you are. You're just
Yeah.
this fantastic celebrity. Like you just have this gorgeous life. And I mean, now we know a lot of it's not so much cloak and dagger, but it's not quite how it all looks on
Yes.
the
Right.
surface. Um, and I remember just kind of thinking to myself, like, looking at all these girls just like me, really, just
Right.
with a lot more influence, and thinking, God, I wonder like what would happen if it came out that one of them had like such a dark secret, like a proper dark side. And it would really shock everybody because their lives look so perfect. And it was thinking about that, and I was like, oh, I actually really would love to write about an influencer who has a really dark side. And around the same time, I'd read The Girls by Emma Cline, which, if you don't know it, it's a fantastic book about a 14-year-old girl who gets kind of drawn into a cult, which is similar to the real life Manson family,
Oh.
the Manson family murders. Very sinister bit of history, but very interesting. And I was looking at cults and things like the big, famous cults
Mhm.
from in the 80s, like Jim Jones and Jonestown and that kind of thing. And I was wondering, kind of to myself, really, just how do you get so involved in such a group and believe in somebody so much that you might be, you know, convinced or influenced to, commit murder, or in the case of Jonestown, take your own life, which is incredible. And you wonder how does that happen? How do
Right.
people get drawn into these places? And I think those just kind of crossed.
Mhm.
At some point, I was saying to myself, like, I wonder if, one of these influencers from back in the 80s, influencers, cult leaders back in the 80s, how much influence they could have if they were around today and had social media. I mean, these people grew their followings on like word of mouth.
Yeah.
It wasn't like now where you can post on Instagram and reach 1 million people. And then I thought, what if the influencer's dark side was that she actually wanted to start a cult and use her followers for not very positive things? And
No, and
that's
it's
where Clara came from.
yeah, that's it's so sorry. That is so my do not disturb did not work on that. So interesting. So I want to talk about sort of like, as you said, you are of that age, the way you sort of grew up in those formative late teens, early 20s with this sort of phenomenon, which is so
Mhm.
unique. And I do think we, and even, women of, my generation who didn't have social media, we still identified those girls, particularly on campus, who were really wealthy, beautiful, who seemed to sort of have it all. The boys were, always sort of swarming around them. And there's this sense of like what we see on the outside, we believe sort of radiates all the way through them. What I love about, and one of the things I love about the Goldens is that we get a sense of what happens in Clara's life. We get a sense from Chloe overhears her with her parents and and sort of it's not all right, it's not all roses, her existence. But but it is interesting. So what is about that? Why does that grip us so tightly, women? I mean, I think maybe men do it in a different way, but for us, it's that like there's something about the woman who looks, so put together, so confident. It's a little bit of a hit of a drug for us to sort of try to understand that, right? Especially as young women.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think especially when you're in kind of like such a transformational period like university, like for a lot of, young girls going to university, it's the first time away from home, the first time being surrounded by a group of peers that they didn't grow up with.
Hmm.
School is one thing, but university is very different. Like you
Right.
feel like a little fish in a big pond. And everyone's old. You feel like everyone's older than you, cooler than you, more successful than you. And they're always, like you said, look, you see those people, like girls on campus, and you kind of think, God, maybe, how do I be like that?
Right.
And I think like the transformational s- time that you're going through makes that so much more intense. I don't know.
And there's an opportunity sort of to reinvent ourselves, right? I mean, we leave, and I think for Chloe in particular, right? She grew up, her parents didn't have a lot of money. And, she gets to school with the, hopes of writing a book and she's got big dreams. Her roommates are awful, to her, which,
Yeah.
happens, of course. And they all sort of judge her for being, from some small town and sounding sort of hokey. I mean, they're just, as only girls can do. They're really, really awful. So she's particularly vulnerable to sort of Claire's appeal. And of course, it's clout, right? It's a sim like if she gets friends with Clara, then obviously that brings her up on the rung, and if nothing else, she gets to snub that to her roommate. So there's all of these reasons why for her, and they happen, the way that it happens is so clever. They have the same initials. She finds a scarf, and Claire is also equally desperate. You can tell Claire is desperate for a real friend, or at least that's sort of the sense we get in the beginning, right? So when you came up with Clara, which obviously is I can imagine how much how many role models for Clara there are in the world of Instagram influencers. What about how did you sort of form Chloe? Like, what were the things that you thought about? Because really, you have to sort of, in this, and is this, I guess I should ask first, is this the first book you've ever written? Are there books buried in the backyard? Um,
It is the first book I've ever written. There was a couple of attempts, shall we say, that kind of petered out around the 40K mark when I realized I was kind of just writing for the vibes and there wasn't much plot.
got it.
With the Goldens, I had a plot, so Yeah, that one
Okay,
got so
so yeah, so how did you develop I mean, Clara, it seems I can imagine you were able to sort of just look at the outside world. Chloe feels much more sort of personal. There has to be, and not that she's you, obviously, but that there's some sort of your own experiences in that. And, how did you develop her?
Yeah, there's a tiny bit of myself in Chloe, I think. I too at 18 was a bit of an anxious northerner off to uni. Unlike Chloe, I went to university in the north. But Chloe's gone quite out of her comfort zone.
Right.
I went to uni 40 minutes from home. But it's kind of similar in that, like what you said before about wanting to reinvent yourself. Um, I stayed kind of, true to myself, but I was very shy and I really wanted to make friends. And I got lucky that my flatmates were nice. But I did know some people who, had the opposite kind of experience. And I think Chloe kind of came from that really. Someone like me, a little bit, a little bit bookish, a little bit shy. I just imagined what it might have been like if I hadn't had the nice flatmates that I did, who did bring me out of my shell and convinced me to go on nights out with them and things like that. Otherwise, I think I probably would have just sat in my room like
Well,
reading.
I think that's, I mean, the reality of it is, I also am a natural introvert. I mean, I think for those of us more comfortable with a book than we are with with a group of people, it's the system, the social system, the universe, the way it's all set up is actually kind of, I feel like the world is set up a little bit for introverts to flail, if not fail, right? It's because people, the way that you meet people is in those early days is if you don't click with your roommates, it's big gatherings, and that is really intimidating. So I can see for Chloe, and her behavior of her flatmates, it's of course that behavior is them protecting their own positions, right? There's this sort of dance we all do, like, we're not going to let you in because it has to be somewhat exclusive because if it's somewhat exclusive, then we're better than somebody, even if it's just you. There's this, that sort of hierarchy, that dancing hierarchy. And in the beginning, the parties that Clara throws are full of these very sort of upper echelon models, actors, people that sort of are much more like Clara. But interestingly, through the course of the book, right, her parties sort of, as you said, she's cultivating a different type of crowd, one more willing to do whatever it takes, right, to be part of the group. So you said you had, you obviously had a plot for this one, and I wanted to ask, so did you plot the whole story out before you wrote it? Or did you sort of work in chunks? How did that process work for you? Because it's impressive that this is I mean, this is very impressive that this is your first book, that is now going to be available on the shelf. So that's exciting.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. I
Hmm.
think I started out kind of like I did with the previous two, where I was like, oh, I have an idea. And then I got to about the 20,000 word spot, few chapters in, and I was like, I'm going to need to structure this more if I actually want to finish it because I had this idea in my head of where I wanted it to go.
Mhm.
And I knew that I would probably, without a plan, I would probably just flail a little bit like I did with the other books. So I had like an act one, act two, act three kind of grid
Mhm.
on my Scrivener, and I wrote out. Um, I basically divided. This is very
No, it's good.
niche.
I think it's so useful to hear. I mean, it's always interesting to hear other people's processes, but I also think it's useful, right? Because especially since this was your first time writing a whole book, so how you sort of navigated it is an interesting story. So please share,
Okay.
share it with us.
Thank you. Yeah, I basically broke it up into chunks. So I was aiming for so like novels, they say, what is it, like between 40 to 80,000 words is a novel. So I thought, right, I need a target. So I went for about, I think I aimed for about 60 in the end, like in the middle of that. And then I knew that a short chapter is about 2,500 words. So I divided it and then made sure I had a chapter for each 2,500 word chunk. And then on a little table, I wrote out what needed to happen in every chapter to get where I needed to be, which it probably took me like a couple of days to like
Yeah.
get all that out. But once I had it all written out in front of me, it was a lot easier. Because if I wasn't feeling very, motivated or I was flailing a little bit, like, oh, what do I have to write next? I could just go back to my plan and go, right, well, we have to get in this chapter from A to B.
Mhm.
So I have 2,500 words to make that happen.
Yeah.
That was pretty much how I got through it right to the end, just little chunks, as
I
much
mean,
as
it
I
does,
could.
it makes it so much more manageable. I'm curious now because, when you got to the end of the book, how much has it changed from that initial draft to today?
Probably, I think the kind of core elements are still the same. So the general plot itself is pretty similar, but we kind of amped up everything.
Mhm.
So I did, I think, 2 or 3 rounds of edits with my agent, Chloe, who's also called Chloe.
Oh, that's funny.
Incredible. Before we went on sub, and
Mhm.
then I did another few rounds on sub as well, after
With
with my
your
editors.
editor. Yeah.
Yeah. So
So
I'm lucky to have 2 editors. So actually, my UK and US editors worked together, which was fantastic.
that is lovely. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's right.
So tell us about, so this was, I'm assuming you wrote this book and then queried agents.
Yes, I did.
Tell us about that, because I think, how did you find the agents that you wanted to query? How did you find the process?
So I had quite an interesting process. It was all very quick. I know it can take a long time. So my experience is very much the unicorn experience. I just want to put that out there. This does not happen all the time, and I was not expecting it to be quick. But basically, I'd had like my finished manuscript, and I wasn't feeling, I'd done some edits. A couple of people I knew had read it, and I was like, right, okay, time to do it. But there was one of those Twitter, X now, pitch events, and it was mood pitch where you make like a mood board on Pinterest or Canva or something, and pitch your book in like a sentence. So I took part in that. And what happens with that is if an agent is or an editor is interested and they'd like you to query them, they like your pitch, like they'll favorite the tweet. And I think I got a couple and I was like, oh, exciting. But then later I got a message through a contact form on my like freelancing website from a lovely agent in New York who, said she was really interested and would I consider sending it to her. Um, and, she got back to me. She really liked it. And that gave me I kind of thought, it felt like a bit of a gamble at the time, but I was like, do I sign with the first agent to show interest, or do I query more widely? And I thought, I have to be sensible. I was very excited. Have to be sensible and query more widely.
Yeah, smart.
And because of that, I queried who's now my agent, Chloe Seeger, who is fantastic. I queried 6 agents altogether, and I got, I think it was something like 3 passes, a couple of full requests, and obviously full requests from Chloe. And in the end, it was 2 offers of rep, one from Chloe and one from the agent in New York, who was, as I said, absolutely lovely. But to be honest, I'd been wanting to query Chloe for a while. She
Yeah.
was dream agent territory. And I just kind of thought, what have I got to lose,
Yes.
Um,
So how did you find the agents that you were going to query? It's all so different now. I feel like, I mean, my experience is decades old. So tell us about how did you find Chloe? How did you know about her?
so I knew about Chloe in 2 ways, which is quite weird. So the first was during my master's degree in creative writing. One of the things, we were doing was talking about agents and, who we'd like to represent us one day. And I remember thinking, oh, maybe I'll do a bit of research, before I get to it, and have a little look. And I found the Madeline Melbourne Literary
Oh,
Agency,
right. I know them. Yeah.
um,
Fabulous.
yeah,
Yeah.
which seemed like a great fit.
Yes.
They seemed brilliant. They had a lot of books that I knew of,
Yeah.
which is very exciting. And Chloe just seemed immediately very, very passionate. And I thought one day I'd love to query her. A couple of years passed, and my at the time boyfriend's sister is also an author. She's called Laura Stephen.
Oh,
She's
wow.
very cool. And she signed with Chloe.
So you knew somebody who
All
knew
things.
her. That's amazing.
Yeah. So then I knew someone who knew her. So when I said, I'm going to officially query Chloe, look, and full disclosure, Laura asked Chloe to keep an eye out for my query. So
That, I
when
mean,
it went
that's,
through,
yeah,
there you
that help, whatever we can do, right? I mean, those, because they
exactly.
get so many. So, but obviously she loved the material right from the beginning. So,
Yeah, she read it very quickly. And we had a meeting, I think, like the next week,
okay.
which was lovely. But yeah, I know how hard and disheartening querying can be. So I just, want to put
Well,
it all out
I mean,
there.
so I've been in this job for 25 years and it's
Wow.
17 books. So I think I mean, we love to hear the lottery stories because I think, there's a lot, and this business is so up and down. So I think it's fantastic. And I can see the pitch exactly why it appealed. It's super creative. The ambiance of the house, like the way you set the whole thing up is so wonderful. And the girls, like, women, I mean, it's interesting actually, if I think about it, there are almost no men. I mean, are there any men? Like, are there any men? There really aren't any men. I mean, men are around, right? But
Mhm.
this is really a story about women friendships,
It
right?
is. Yeah,
Normally,
very
when we
feminine.
Yeah, normally when we read, I'm really just literally that's clicking for me. Because normally I think when we read about women friendships, oftentimes there's a man in the middle or, one of them's dating somebody and he's a factor. But this book is really just about women. And that is actually, fabulous.
Yeah, it wasn't actually intentional.
Yeah, fair. Yeah.
At the time, it was kind of, I think, after like the first round of edits, I was like, the only side characters in this are men.
Yeah.
But there's so much media out there where the side characters are all women. And like you say, it's about female friendships and female relationships. And we don't need a man in there.
No, no, and
Um,
I think it eliminates sort of the natural trope of like, two girls fighting over a man. Like that, we've
yeah.
read that and obviously the reason it's a trope is it's it's true, it happens, no question. But the idea that it's these, that women, this sort of it's this microcosm of women, which I think is so, so fabulous. So you do populate. I mean, there's Olivia, there's Vanessa, there are other women around. So once you figured out sort of, I found Olivia to be a really interesting character. Because she's sort of the level-headed one who tries to help Chloe
Mhm.
navigate the insanity of the friendship with Clara by sort of pointing out where the risk might be. So did she develop sort of as you were writing because you were like, there has to be sort of a sane, a voice of sanity here. How did that happen?
Yeah, I think a voice of sanity is a good way to describe Olivia.
Yeah.
I wanted somebody to be almost kind of in Chloe's real life.
Yeah.
At university, living in student accommodation, doing her assignments like everybody else. Like a level-headed, I guess like almost like a little moral compass, bless her. She's just very normal. Whereas, Chloe starts getting into this life as, like you said before, it's populated with, actresses and models, and she's very much very up in the clouds, where I think Olivia's quite down to earth and keen on helping keep her there.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's right. And I really appreciated that. And that's sort of this interesting because of course, Clara sees the relationship between Chloe and Olivia as, competition with her own relationship. And Clara very much likes to have every be the sort of sole spotlight for everybody in her, in her atmosphere, which is so it is, and the stakes feel very real, even though of course we hope that the events of the book are not something that the events of the book are not something that are going to happen at any university anytime soon. But we can see exactly how the whole thing snowballs. So is
Mhm.
beautifully done. So now I have to ask, the dreaded question as we publish a book and we're so excited it's everyone wants to know what we're working on next, right? Um, Are you working on a new book? Can you talk about it? Feel free to say no. That's totally fair. And
Mhm.
how does it feel to be, how does that process feel? Because of course, you now that you've done it, you know you can do it, but there's other feels as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much I'm allowed to talk about it, but I
Fair.
have written a second book.
Okay, you have one, you've written one.
Yes, I've already written one. How much am I allowed to say?
Well,
Let's
that's
see.
fair. You don't have to tell us. I mean, I would say, is it in the same, was you writing a thriller, it's suspense?
Yeah, I'll say it's a thriller, and it's in a similar vein in terms of female friendships and the evils of social media.
Right, fabulous. I love that. Now, when you started your other two books, were they thrillers? Did you always know you were going to write thrillers? I think like I don't think I knew I was writing a thriller until there was like a dead body on page 5, and I was like, oh wow, that's clearly not going to be a romance. So I'm curious about that for you. Did you know that's what you wanted to do?
So I think the other two that I attempted were kind of like, so one of them was quite dystopian-y, and one of them I just read Never Let Me Go. And I thought it was so brilliant, and I wanted to write something equally as
Yeah,
sinister, but I didn't quite have the skill level for that.
yeah,
Um,
for
but
sure.
yeah, I wasn't sure if The Goldens was going to be a thriller.
Oh,
When I started it, I knew it was going to, something was going to go sinister. I wanted it to have this dark side, but I wasn't 100% sure where I wanted it to go until kind of like Your Dead Body on page 5. When I started plotting it out, I was like, oh, this is getting dark actually. Like this is escalating. And it was kind of at that
yeah.
point I was like, oh, actually, yeah, maybe this is a thriller. But I 100% I wasn't 100% sure, I think, until it was with Chloe and we kind of started pitching it as a thriller. It's quite hard to kind of, I don't know, define your own genre. Does
Yeah,
that make sense? I was
yeah,
kind of like, I've written a story,
right.
but I don't know what it is yet.
So I'm curious, and how about, I know you mentioned you're engaged. Congratulations. I'm always
Thank
curious to hear
you.
how, the first time thriller, because you're young and what your family, my family was like, what is happening? So, what does this surprise anybody? That you have these dark, dark, fabulously intricate dark thoughts that you can put down.
Yeah, I think a little bit. My mum read it, and she's like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
My parents are very much not like Clara's. They are very much Chloe's. They're very like lovely and supportive. But yeah, I think they were a little bit surprised by how dark it got.
Mhm.
But in terms of me writing a book, I've always been a huge reader. Like I've always nicked printer paper and typewriter paper to write books
I love it.
since I was a
This
kid.
isn't
So
your first book.
that
You've been
wasn't a
writing
surprise.
books since kindergarten.
Yeah, I mean, they were like 6 pages
Of
about like
course.
I don't
Fair.
know. I think the first one was like a robin eating a worm or something, and they became friends. I
Oh,
don't
the Robin and
know.
the Worm became friends. It's very
Yeah,
unlikely. I like
who
that.
knows?
I love that. That's so exciting.
Interesting.
Well, Lauren, I love it. And the Goldens was so much fun. As I was trying to, as I was babbling in the beginning about the appeal of this kind of story, maybe I don't know why it appeals so much to me to sort of, extrapolate these female friendships, like, that you pull back the sort of layers of them like an onion and get to the meat of it. But it rings very authentic and true, and you made the characters really come alive for me. So congratulations, it's super exciting.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
Tell our listeners where to find you if they want to follow you and figure out, find, um, the book and what you're working on next and all that good stuff. So social media, I'm assuming you're on that since you grew
I
up with it.
am.
Good. Where do we
Yeah,
find you?
absolutely. I'm on X, TikTok, and Instagram as Lauren W. Author.
I love it. Well, everybody, we will be giving away a copy of Lauren's book, either on our brand new Killer Women Instagram page. Finally got that done, or on the original page on Facebook. So come listen to the episode with Lauren and look for the opportunity to win a copy of The Goldens. And then do come out, check out this fabulous cover because it's really extraordinary. And that home, the manor. Was
Love it so much.
I know I want to go there. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on Killer Women with Lauren Wilson. We will see you next time. Bye.